Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Kelley Ford of thelines.com on the show. He is also the founder of kfordratings.com, an increasingly popular college football website. Kelley, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ed, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited to be talking some college football and college football playoff here with you today.
Absolutely, yeah. We have so much to talk about as we get into the new year. But first, this podcast is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. Kelley, what has been your biggest analytics takeaway from the 2023 college football season?
Yeah, there are always, Ed, so many takeaways from any given college football season. And for me, I dive deep into the numbers each summer to see what overarching themes kind of persist regardless of the other factors, like what is independently driving some of my findings here. And I then subject those findings to back testing in my model. I play with different weights for the various inputs and ultimately try to determine if any changes to the model are warranted. In recent years, I've only made minor tweaks, if anything, as the model has performed very well with regard to absolute air kind of year in and year out here, especially recently. So more to come in the summer months. But for now, I have a few main takeaways that I can talk about briefly. First and foremost, we don't have a dominant team or group of teams at the top of college football in 2023, at least by my numbers. Michigan, my number one power rated team, has a current power rating of 28.0. What that means is my model would make Michigan a 28-point favorite on a neutral field against the average FBS team. So my ratings are scaled from negative infinity to positive infinity, but your raw rating is how many points would you be favored by or an underdog by on a neutral field against the FBS average team if you guys were to play tomorrow. So Michigan, number one, 28.0. That would rank number 3 if it was last year. It would be number 3 if it was the 2021 season, number 4 in 2020, number 5 in 2019, and number 3 in 2018. The last time, Ed, that the number one team in my power ratings had a rating of 28.0 or worse was 2015. So we didn't just have a dominant team or group of teams this year like Alabama has been, or Clemson has been, or Georgia most recently that we've seen throughout the college football playoff era. We just didn't have that this year. That to me was the main takeaway. A couple others that came to mind for me as I was looking at this, the impact of close games. And this really shouldn't be surprising to anybody, and it persists every year, but it's always interesting to see how it impacts and shapes the race, both in conferences and the national championship. Last year, it was TCU. This year, it's Washington. The Huskies finished the regular season +6 in net one-possession wins. What does that mean? Washington won 6 more one-possession games than it lost during the regular season. Add in the conference championship game, and UW is 7-0 in such games this year. There is certainly something to be said for having the ability to win close games, but history suggests it's hard to sustain that year over year. TCU, I mentioned last year, they won all these close games. This year, TCU finished -4 in one-possession games. That's tied with Nebraska, who ironically seems to always be in this conversation. That was the worst record in one-possession games this year, that -4. I'm curious to see if Washington can ride that wave for another game or two. I know we're going to talk about that here on this episode. And then lastly, Ed, the third point for now in terms of my biggest takeaways, it's the importance of preseason priors. And early on this year, everyone was just crushing Alabama, like the outside world, not on the football field, but on the outside world, everyone was just killing Alabama. After the loss to Texas, an ugly win against a bad USF team, I was really examining, what exactly is this Crimson Tide team? And more importantly, what wasn't this Crimson Tide team? Many people left them for dead. And while my model did downgrade them significantly, they were down to a season low number 10 halfway through the year. That's the lowest an Alabama team had been ranked by my model since 2008, as I had to go back and look at that. Alabama was never, though, not the favorite to win the SEC West at any time this year by my model. My model had Alabama as the favorite to win the West every single week, even when they were having their struggles on the field. That's because their preseason priors were propping them up. And that's just one example. But I found that preseason priors are very predictive in nature, and keeping them in the formula throughout the year improves the accuracy of the projections, Ed.
Absolutely. I found a lot about, I found that as well in my work. And yeah, let's talk about Alabama a little bit. I was actually working on my preview today, and you mentioned how there's no dominant teams. Alabama's a big part of that, and they're just not quite what they were 3 to 4 years ago. And I went back and looked it up. From 2020 to 2022, they put 5 receivers in the first round of the NFL draft. That's an insane number in such a short number of years. There was also a second round pick in there as well. You also look at the string of quarterbacks that they've had that are all applying their trade in the NFL right now. It's a really interesting team to look at, right? Because now you have Jalen Milroe, who probably isn't as good a quarterback as the last 4 guys that have been there. The wide receiver core hasn't been the same. It was probably weaker last year. So, it's interesting to just see how the program isn't quite the same, but yet the defense is still amazing, at least by my metrics, and they're still obviously in the hunt, controversy or otherwise, right? So college football changes, and then college football stays the same in some ways.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'm with you 100% on Alabama. By my numbers, Ed, this is actually the worst Alabama team by my power ratings since 2013. I mean, this is the worst team that Nick Saban has fielded in a decade, and they are lacking some of those explosive receivers or high-level quarterback play that we've seen in recent years especially, but it doesn't matter. Here they are in the CFP once again, and Ed, I said it time and time again this year. I even probably said it when you came on We Hate Your Team with Zach and I earlier this year. Alabama, they don't need to be better than the previous versions of themselves. The Crimson Tide only need to be better than the teams on their schedule here in 2023. And outside of that week 2 game against Texas, that's exactly what Alabama has been this year. So you're right. For as much as things change in college football, here we are in a playoff. Michigan for the 3rd straight year, Alabama for the 8th time in the 10-year playoff era, I want to say. Washington back in here for the first time since 2016, and Texas. Texas is back, right? That's what they say, and here they are in the playoff.
Kelley, before we get into breaking down some of these games, can you give a quick overview of how you come up with this rating that Michigan is 28 points better than the average FBS team, and what kind of data goes in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So at a very high level, what I did, Ed, when I was kind of starting out trying to make my own power ratings, the Kelley Ford ratings now as I call them, I was a big fan of Bill Connolly, who at the time had S&P Plus, now SP Plus, and Brian Fremeau, who FEI, and of course together the F Plus ratings. I was a big fan of their work. And as I was diving into the college football analytics space, I basically set out to do kind of what they were doing. And so at the core of my model, like the engine of my model, is pretty darn similar, I would say, to Bill, and maybe Bill's more so than Brian's. And to be honest, it's because I could find more data about what Bill was doing than Brian at the time. Now, I've since, developed a relationship with Brian and learned more and more about what he's got going on too. But when I started out, I was basically trying to replicate what they were doing. And because I was like, hey, these are the 2 best at it. And then as I'm going through learning, Ed, I come across your numbers at the Power Rank, and bought your March Madness upset book and all that stuff, how to win your March Madness pools and all that. And so not Bill and Brian aren't the only ones that influenced me, but certainly the biggest influences. And so a lot of the things that Bill and Brian were doing, 10, 15 years ago was what I jumped into, in the late 2010s and ultimately went public with in 2019. And I've picked up on different things, and through my own data collection and back testing now, I kind of diverged down at my own path. So still incorporating a lot of the things, the 5 factors are of course things that folks will talk about, especially with Bill's work. But I've incorporated a lot of things that they were doing and then tried to find my own kind of bits and pieces to make my recipe unique. But basically what we're trying to do is isolate the predictive elements of college football. What is inherently predictive about this game? Isolate that from the noise, because there is a lot of noise, data that doesn't necessarily mean anything with regard to trying to replicate success in the future. isolate the correct and useful information from the noise and package that up, weight it appropriately. I talked about back testing earlier, which I do every summer. I'm always looking to tweak the model. What needs to go into it? What are the updated predictive elements? Are things changing? College football is changing. College athletics are changing. Are the elements of football that are proven to be predictive in nature, are those changing? Are they evolving with the game here, or are those largely staying the same? What I have found is that tweaking the inputs more so than changing them has what's led to the most accurate projections here in recent years. And when I say accurate projections, my goal is to minimize absolute error. So if my projected spread, for example, is Michigan -6 against Ohio State, I want the end result of that game, which was Michigan by 6 over Ohio State this year. I want that number, that differential, to be as small as possible. That's what I'm working towards with mine. People are out there trying to find edges with against the spread numbers and all that stuff. Because I actually work in college athletics full time, I'm really looking to optimize absolute error. As I continue to back test and tweak things, that's what I have ultimately as my end goal. But yes, I'm trying to identify what are the predictive elements of college football and how can those be applied and packaged in a model that you can then use to try to forecast the outcome of future games. It's very, very hard. And as you know, you do it for multiple sports. So it's very difficult, but it's a fun puzzle. And my brain is kind of wired that way to try to attack that problem and figure out the best way we can how to power rate these teams.
Excellent. Bill Connolly has done so much interesting and seminal work in college football analytics. So, from what you said, we know you're looking at things like success rate, yards per play, finishing drives, I think within the 40-yard line. That's something that he looks at. Would you be willing to give us an example of a statistic beyond those things that we usually talk about that you found to be useful?
So I keep those somewhat close to the vest, Ed, because at some point I would like to see if I can transition this into something that provides more financial incentive for myself and maybe a revenue stream down the line. Of course, right now that's not the case given my day job. But so I'm very careful with what I share. But I will say it is not it's not just Bill, right? Like Parker Fleming Stats of War. He's got his echo ratio. That was an innovative thing from a couple of years ago. Now it's helped him really make a career out of data analytics over at Sumer Sports now. So I'm really constantly looking at the people that are in this space, yourself included, Ed, and trying to identify what are these people looking at, not necessarily what are they doing, what are they looking at? What are the questions they're asking that are leading them to their results that I need to be asking myself similar types of questions. And later, Ed, I think we're gonna talk about maybe books or movies or podcasts, things that I'm trying to get into here recently, and I can go more in depth on a book that I'm trying to get into now that's going to help me in this regard, I hope. But that's what I'm trying to do, is really just ask myself questions along similar lines to the questions being asked by those in the space, yourself included, that I really admire and look up to, and I'm trying to emulate, because you can't. I've found you can't just follow forever and have a product that people are going to want to pay for or get super excited about. You can try to just blend different models together and come up with kind of an aggregate rating, if you will. And I know people that do that, and they have great success in the betting market doing it because their strength in numbers. It's wisdom of the crowds, right? I know you talk about that. All of that is very helpful and important. But to truly separate, you need to come up with something unique and something different, something that changes the game and the way people think about problems and analyzing college football. That's what I'm working on. And so hopefully at some point, maybe in the near future, I'm able to share more about what those things are. And I would certainly love, more so than anybody else, to be able to get in that position. But for now, that's kind of where I am.
Excellent. Let's get into some of these semifinal games. We have Michigan versus Alabama in the Rose Bowl. We have Michigan as a 1.5 point favorite as of now. I think it opened the spread much bigger, but it has come down to 1.5. What are your numbers saying about this game, and what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, this game should be really, really exciting, Ed. And I talked about it. Michigan, they're my number one power rated team. They have been my number one power rated team since the midpoint of the regular season. They boast the nation's number one offense and the number 7 defense by my numbers. The Wolverines have the highest floor of any team in college football, not just the playoff, any team in college football. They simply don't play poor games. The 7-point win at Maryland, who I have power rated, in the top 35. So that Maryland at full strength is not a bad football team. That's probably their worst performance of the season, outside of maybe sleepwalking in the first half of games against really bad opponents early in the year. But even that game against the Terps, you can say Michigan likely had an eye already turned towards the game against the Buckeyes the following week. Depending on the source you use, Michigan has at least 9 national championships to their name. But Ed, per my historical power ratings, and I've gone back a couple off seasons ago, I went back and the best I could created estimated power ratings for every single team that's ever played college football at the highest level, all the way back to 1869 when the scoring rules were different and we only had 2 teams playing, Rutgers and Princeton, like all the way back to the beginning. I have estimated power ratings. And of course, the farther back you go, the less data available, meaning the less accurate the ratings are going to be. But I have estimated ratings for every single Michigan team that's ever been fielded in Ann Arbor. This is the best one. This one comes out graded highest of any Michigan team in their history. This team just doesn't have a weakness. On the other side, I already talked about earlier, this Alabama team, this is not the best Alabama team ever. It's actually the worst in the last 10 years, as I talked about. But if Michigan has the highest floor of any team in college football, especially in the playoff, Alabama has the highest ceiling of the team still competing for the national championship. 1 week after needing a 4th and goal from the 31 to beat a 6-6 Auburn team, Alabama took the 2-time reigning champs down in Atlanta. And the Tide's defense, they're currently number 7 in my unit rankings. They've been ranked as high as number 4 for me this year. While the offense did bottom out at number 29 early in the year, they've rebounded all the way back up to number 12. So that to me is going to be the question mark here. That Alabama offense at number 12 is the worst unit in this game by my numbers, the only unit outside the top 7 nationally. Can they play well enough against this number 1 offense or number 1 defense, in the entire country on that Michigan side? My model makes this Michigan minus 4.5. So strictly based on that, the recommendation would be to lay the points with the Wolverines. But with a month to prepare, Ed, I think it's more likely than not that we get Alabama's A game. And I said they have the highest ceiling. If we get that A game from Alabama, I think it's enough to win this game outright. So the model says Michigan, lay the points. My gut, which I have the model, so I'm not trusting my gut, but there's just something about it here. My gut tells me Nick Saban with a month to prepare, this Alabama team seemingly peaking at the right time. But remember, we say peaking at the right time because they just knocked off Georgia. They didn't look so great against Auburn just the week before that. I think they can get it done if they play their A game. The question is, will they play their A game? My gut tells me they probably will. Either way, Ed, the winner of this one, they will be the favorite in the national championship game.
For sure. Alabama definitely has a pretty strong track record of coming to the playoff, coming to the BCS, whatever it is, and playing pretty well. Michigan doesn't have as good a track record. Got blown out 2 years ago against Georgia, which, you can kind of give them a pass because it was a pretty dominant Georgia team. Really did not play well in a game they should have won against TCU last year. Still had a chance to win it towards the end. Any thoughts on how they may come out in this game? Objectives, probably more of a subjective call on your part.
Yeah, so Michigan, like I said, they really don't have weaknesses. And the question is going to be, can they fire on all cylinders? Because this defense hasn't been outside the top 3 for me all year. I'm not worried about this defense. I think they're going to get stops. I think they're going to make plays. Alabama might have to have a trick play or two up their sleeve to try to get this Michigan defense. And I think, like I said, with a month to prepare, they will be able to do that. Jalen Milroe, if he plays his A game, it's going to be hard for Michigan because for as solid as the Michigan offense has been, JJ McCarthy, Ed, you're close to the Michigan program in terms of your proximity, your geographic proximity. When's the last time Michigan asked JJ McCarthy to win a game? Was it the TCU game last year, which they didn't win, right? So Michigan, I think they're going to have to ask JJ McCarthy, who's a very, very good college quarterback. I see first round grades on him. Again, I'm not a prognosticator of how these college players project into the NFL. There's lots and lots of people who do that much, much better than me. But the people that do it say this is a first round pick. Now he may still come back to college next year. We'll see. But he's a very talented quarterback. I just want to know, Can he, in the biggest moments, get it done? Because it's no fault of his own. He just hasn't been asked to do a lot down the stretch here, or really all season, because they've relied on the defense. They've relied on the run game. They've relied on that offensive line. And again, there's no weaknesses. But that top end of Alabama, if they can come out with a trick play or two, if they can hit some explosive plays, which it's been hit or miss on this team this year. They've been able to do it sometimes. They haven't other times. It's going to be very, very hard. This is going to be the best defense Alabama faces all year. Obviously, they're Michigan's defense number 1 in the country. Can Alabama find enough of those explosive plays, enough of those trick plays to get Michigan off guard? With a month to prepare, I keep coming back to with a month to prepare, I think they will. I say this, and this is applicable every single year, not just this year. The longer the layoff, historically, the longer the layoff between games, the more it favors the underdog. What we're not used to seeing is Alabama being the underdog in these games in which they've had a month plus to prepare for them, right? They're always the hunted, not the hunter. Well, now they're the hunter. And Harbaugh's back. He was back for the Big Ten championship game against Iowa. So it's not like they're going to get a huge boost from him returning to the sidelines for this one. But he has missed 6 games this year. And so the fact that he is there, I do think provides a very calming influence on J.J. McCarthy, which quite possibly could be needed because, like I said, this is going to be the game, I think, that if Michigan wins it, I think it's going to have to be J.J. McCarthy that gets it done. Not to say the offense or the running game won't play a big factor, not to say the defense isn't going to make some big plays. I just don't know if those two things, the things that have been enough for Michigan to win consistently every single week this year, I'm not sure if Alabama plays their A game, that's going to be enough for Michigan. So expect some trick plays from Alabama. They're going to be trying to hit some home runs. And for Michigan, they just need to do what they've always done. And that is be consistent, keep that floor as high as possible. Don't make any mistakes. And JJ, there's going to come a time in this game, might be in the third quarter, might be in the fourth quarter. They're going to ask you to make some plays, and he's going to have to do it. And he has the talent to. The question is, will he be able to, because he just hasn't been relied on to do that in a very long time.
Yeah, I do think they're going to have to rely on J.J. McCarthy. I do think they're going to run J.J. McCarthy because he's a very capable runner. Mm-hmm. He was a little dinged up against Ohio State. I thought they'd run him anyways. They didn't. It's interesting to think about JJ's trajectory as well. He wasn't the starter 2 years ago when they first made the playoff. He ended up coming in against Georgia and actually gave the offense a chance to do something. It was in general a pretty tough game. Last year he was the starter. He had a pretty good game against Ohio State, but they broke off a couple of explosive plays in the run game that really kind of sealed that game. Was kind of terrible against TCU, at least in throwing a couple pick sixes there, which was, obviously unideal. And then this year, he has been really good. I've actually had their passing attack better by my adjusted success rate than their run game. That was definitely the opposite in his first season as a starter. But he will be asked to win this game, and I think he'll need to. And I think there's a good chance that he will. Let's move on to Texas and Washington. Texas is a 4-point favorite in the markets, 4.5 some places. Washington is a team that, as you mentioned before, has had some good fortune in these one-score games. What are your numbers saying about this game?
Yeah, so Texas is back. I mentioned it earlier. That's an all too common saying this past decade. And honestly, people, they either just laughed at it or they rolled their eyes and then laughed or they simply ignored it because it was like the boy who cried wolf, Ed. I mean, it was said over and over and it never ended up being real. Well, it finally happened. I mean, the wolf finally came. My power ratings, along with others, yours and others out there too. I mean, we forecasted this. We forecasted it was building towards this moment. Per my historical ratings, this is the best Texas team in Austin since 2009. I mean, that was the year that Colt McCoy was injured in the national championship game against Alabama. This Longhorn team is legit. The offense ranks number 9. The defense ranks number 10. And overall, I have the Longhorns at number 7 in my power ratings, which actually, Ed, is one spot lower than they were in the preseason. But their raw rating is about 3.5 points better. So their ordinal rank is one worse. But the more important piece here, their raw rating is a field goal better than it was in August. This will be the best opposing offense that the Longhorns D has faced all year. But from a pure talent standpoint, it is clear why Vegas makes Texas the favorite in this game. And my model agrees with Vegas in that too. I'll get to what my projected line is here in a second. I've said on numerous occasions this year that the 2023 Washington team reminds me of the 2022 CCU team. I mean, we talked about it earlier with the one possession games. More times than not, Husky fans get offended by that. And it's not an insult by any means that when I say that.
Right.
Yes, the Horned Frogs got blown out in the national championship game against Georgia last year, but they made the national championship game. There were 129 other programs that would have loved to have been in TCU's position a year ago. But much like TCU a year ago, this Washington team, they just keep winning, even when power ratings like mine and like Vegas suggest that they might not. I mean, led by Heisman Trophy runner-up Michael Penix Jr., this Washington team won 3.5 more regular season games than my preseason realistic expectations projected. That made the Huskies my number 5 biggest overachiever in all of FBS. This offense has been ranked in the top 5 for me since week 2. They even spent 1 week at number 1 halfway through the year. But it's the defense that's been better than expected. I pegged this unit at number 50 in the preseason, and after a 5-0 start, they had risen all the way to number 23 on that side of the ball. But since then, Ed, it's been a steady decline. They've settled in around number 40 for the last month of the year. That's the key to the game for me. Can the Washington defense, the only unit ranked outside the top 10 nationally in this game, get enough stops to win this one? In particular, can the Washington secondary slow down this Texas receiving core, which is one of the best in the country? Washington's got some good receivers as well. Ohio State had some horses out there too. But this Texas receiving core, really, really good. Can this Washington secondary and that defense, can they get enough stops? My model has doubted the Huskies before. It's doing it again, just like I did to TCU in the semifinal last year. I have Texas minus 5.5, so I'm pretty close to the Vegas line on this one. But Ed, I'm telling you, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Washington finds a way to get this win, just like TCU did in the semifinal a year ago. These similarities, there's a lot of them, and I'm trying to draw the parallels the best I can without overhyping it, but there's just so much in common between these two teams. So I said the model liked Michigan. My gut kind of liked Alabama. I'm saying now, and I hate doing this, the model says Texas and lay the points. My gut tells me Washington's they just find ways to win. And I'm tired of betting against them, if you will, with the model. And so that's where my gut leans. Kalen DeBoer, I mean, my goodness, Ed, he just wins football games. I don't care if it's at the Power 5 level, the Group of 5 level, or not even the Division I level. It doesn't matter. This man just wins college football games. And I said with a month off, it favors the underdog. Well, Washington's the underdog, and I think they're just a really, really sound football team. They're not the flashiest power rating. I think it's funny, Ed, if Washington and Oregon were to play again tomorrow, people would lose their minds. My model and Vegas would too, and I'd be curious if your numbers agree. Like Oregon would be the pregame favorite by the spread. Now, I'm not going to pick against Washington for a third time, but it's just that the model, predictive models like mine, they don't love this Washington team, just like they didn't love TCU, but they just find ways to win, and there's something to be said for that. And when you're 13-0. If I'm Texas, hey, I'm a favorite. Okay, I'm feeling good about it. You better come ready to play, and you better be able to take advantage of that Washington defense, in particular that secondary, because if you don't, this Michael Penix-led offense, they will score on you. I know you're a top 10 unit yourself, Texas, on defense, but this Washington offense, you can slow them down. You cannot stop them.
Absolutely. Washington, yes, I had Oregon as I liked Oregon a lot in the Pac-12 championship game. Mm-hmm. That didn't work out for me at all. Washington's defense was really good in that game, especially in the first half against Oregon. Did you see anything in that game that you think might translate over to playing well against Texas?
Yeah, I think I even tweeted about it in the moment. I said, Washington's playing ticked off. I mean, on both sides of the ball, but especially on defense, they got tired of hearing, hey, this Oregon team, yeah, we know you guys beat them earlier this year, but that was at home. It was by a field goal. There were all those fourth down plays that, if they go the other way, Washington just got fed up with it and said, all right, well, we already beat them once, but I guess we have to do it again to make people believe us. Well, here we are once again. And I know my model's part of the problem in this regard, saying Texas minus 5.5. I think the Vegas line, maybe Texas minus 4.5, maybe time of recording or somewhere around there.
Yeah,
so
4.5.
we are fueling that fire in Washington again. I expect Washington to come out and play very, very similarly to how they did in that Pac-12 championship game, because when you look at it, all you're doing is replacing the O on the other side with a Longhorn. I mean, you're changing out green for burnt orange, essentially. Now, I do think the Oregon offense is better than the Texas offense, but the Texas offense, they'll attack you in a bit more balanced of a way, more so than I think Oregon, who, for as good as they were, they just ran up their Achilles heel was Washington in the way that they played. And I think Washington can just take the exact same mentality that they had, and they don't have to do anything because everyone's feeding them the fuel they need, and they repeat that blueprint. They're going to find a way to get it done here. I do think it's interesting. These two teams, of course, met last year in the Alamo Bowl, I think it was. So a lot of these players have seen the guys on the other side. Now, in college football today, there's a lot of turnover year to year in rosters, I understand. But a lot of these guys have seen the other side. Sark has, it's been a long time, but at one point, Sark was the head man over there in Seattle. So him going up against his former team, I think that's something that shouldn't be overlooked, even though maybe it's not a primary storyline. It's certainly a part of the plot. So, yes, I think what Washington did in that game in Las Vegas, really opening everyone's eyes to, hey, this team, some teams just supersede models. And this Washington team to this point has been that team. And we'll see if they can do it again.
Yep, absolutely. Kelley, I'd like to end with a potentially non-sports question, and you alluded to your answer a little bit earlier. Did you want to give us a recommendation on a book?
Yes, and I'm sorry to take the non-sports question and tie it back to sports, but
no, not a problem.
That's where my mind is. So, and I am in the process, excuse me, of reading Football Analytics with Python and R. It's by Eric Eager and Richard Erickson. It's out on Amazon right now. You can find it again, Football Analytics with Python and R. The subtitle there, it's about learning data science through the lens of sports. I'm trying to learn how to code. I think I actually need to go through Tage Seth's R tutorials that he has out there on Twitter, on X, before I go any farther in the book. But to this point, I've been doing all my work in Excel, and I get data offline or online, and I bring it offline and scrape it, clean it up, and get it into a usable form for me to use the power ratings. It's difficult, though, in Excel to scale to the volume and level that I would like to, and test some of the things that I would like to, because I don't have the programming skills necessary to do these things. So that's what I'm reading right now to take it away from college football. And I also want to read the expected goals philosophy. Other than college football, soccer is my favorite sport to watch. And I know you do power ratings in soccer. I'm a huge Leicester City supporter. Tough year last year being relegated to the championship. But hey, crushing it right now. We're coming straight back up. That's the goal. That's what we're trying to do. Expected goals change the game so much in soccer, much like Moneyball did in baseball and now other American sports, or popular American sports, I should say. I want to dive deeper into that world of expected goals. I'm familiar with what it is. I know how it works, all that. I want to read the book when I have time. Maybe start doing some soccer power ratings to go with my college football and my college basketball light model. So we'll see. But those are the things I'm trying to read, Ed, with the job and the hobby work here and the family life. I mean, you know how it goes. Time is short, but trying to do what I can here when the college football season is not in full force to bring myself up to speed in some of these other areas that are of interest and I think might potentially benefit my work in this space long term. So if people are looking for something to read, Football Analytics with Python and R and the expected goals philosophy are the two that I'm looking forward to either continuing or diving into here over the next 6 to 9 months.
XG Philosophy is definitely an interesting book that I follow him on Twitter, and it seems like he was one of the first people to start doing this. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think he was. Yep. And I'm excited to dig into that.
Also, another good book for XG is Net Gains by Ryan O'Hanlon. It's a pretty good tour of soccer analytics and its impact and some pretty good stories there as well. So I would recommend that in addition to XG Philosophy.
Making Kelley Ford, a note as we speak.
Awesome. Kelley Ford, thank you so much for joining me on the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can find your work.
Yeah, Ed, I appreciate you having me on. This was so much fun. I've been an admirer of your work for a long time, so really appreciate it. You can find me on X at Ford Ratings, the website kfordratings.com, and then also over at thelines.com as well. I also have the We Hate Your Team podcast that I co-host with my friend Zach King, which for those that listen to this podcast, Ed was a guest for us earlier this year, so had a ton of fun on that one, even more fun on this one. So Ed, thanks again. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to what's going to be a great college football playoff here coming up this week.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me, Kelley. Just a reminder, you can grab my free sports betting email newsletter. If you're looking for sports betting action on any given weekend, this is the free service for you. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and I will talk to you again soon.